talk about trees by Master Gardener Margaret Blohm from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Schenectady County. If you'd like to ask a question, I ask that you would type your question in the chat box, and at the end, we'll come back and read through those questions and answer them. And I think we can get started. Margaret, you were in the class of 2023, is that right, Margaret?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm a newbie.
So
So
Margaret is a newbie, but she's been very involved as a master gardener. And I heard through the grapevine that she had put together a program on trees. And I thought that was a wonderful thing because I wanted to do some tree type programs in honor of Earth Day and Arbor Day, which are just a couple weeks back. And she very graciously agreed to be here with us. So she's not a master gardener from Rensselaer County. I can kind of buttonhole those guys, but Margaret really is doing us a big favor to be here today. So
I'm
thank
happy
you,
to be.
Margaret. I'm going to turn it over to you, and we could see your picture. So I think you could just get started.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to introduce myself quickly first. I retired from about 4 years ago. I retired from GE Research after 32 years there. I have two kids, Mark and Annie, who are both making their way in the world. Annie's in Rochester and Mark's in New York City. And now that I've retired, my husband and I like to spend a lot of time walking in the woods, going on hikes with our two dogs, Lacey, Lizzie and Gracie. While we're doing that, I like to take pictures, and some of the pictures I've included in this presentation. So all the photos are mine except for on one page. So I hope you enjoy them. I have 20,000 more if you'd like to see them as well. So let's get started. How do I get started? It's not moving. Okay, there we go. Okay. So title of my talk is Let's Thank the Trees. And so I'd like to spend some time sharing my love of trees with you and hopefully have some fun. Fun is a big thing. And so let's get going. In the interest of and the thought of thanks, I'd like to start my first slide with a thank you to the people that have really helped me, starting with my tree mentors and friends, Melissa, Betsy, Nick, the tree committee, and all of the Schenectady County Master Gardeners. They've just been fantastic, very supportive and helpful. And a shout out to all you guys down at the SLC right now. Again, I'd also like to thank my family that you've just met. And here's some of the information that I used to create this presentation, some fun books I've read that you might enjoy, some fun websites, journal articles. And again, if you'd like to talk trees anytime, there's my email. So I'd like to start, giving back to that fun idea, with a top 10 list. Are you surprised? Well, I started doing top 10 lists when I worked at GE as a way to get people to come to my meetings. And it worked, and it became, quite the tradition. And I like them because they make you laugh at things that you care about. So let's get started. And I'll just imagine that you're all just laughing hysterically. And if not that, you're at least smiling. Okay, so the top 10 reasons why we should thank the trees. I'll start with a mundane. They make me feel short. Now I'm 6 foot, a little over 6 feet, and I haven't felt short since 1972. So I really like the fact that trees make me feel like I'm average height. They offer to all those not tall people a chance for revenge, because now you get to know what it feels like to not be tall. They also make me feel young. At 65, I am a youngster, and that's something I had to keep in my mind. I am a short youngster. Believe it or not, they do provide a free mandatory fall fitness program. And it's strategically timed as you head into the holidays so that you can eat more. Raking the leaves is a great upper body workout. It also has some good core strengthening as you go to pick up the leaves and bag them. And you could hardly expect a physical trainer to do any better. So be grateful. And now you can quit that fall fitness program without even feeling guilty, because leave the leaves. So before you ruin your back picking up the leaves, the trees have saved you. They are very good listeners. You can say whatever you want to them without feeling stupid. You can rant, you can vent, you can feel sorry for yourself, and they just quietly listen and they don't make you feel bad. Kind of like a good therapist. So, hey, we have trees that are therapists and trees that are physical trainers. What more does anyone need? Then, as we learn more about trees, what I've found is they get even more interesting. I wish that all people were the same. In fact, I have this fear, this phobia that people will find me boring as they get to know me better. I'm terrible at small talk and stuff. So if I was a tree, I wouldn't have to worry. I'd be fascinating. Then, their creative and unique solutions are so different, and they all remind us that diversity is a powerful law of nature. Think of all the different shapes there and sizes there are of leaves, the different types of bark, the different types of seeds. I mean, it's just the variability is amazing, and they all work. They're different. Some work better than others in different situations, but that's diversity. Then they are the best engineers I know. And I worked for 32 years at GE Research, and so I know a lot of engineers. I hope there aren't many GE folks in the audience, but even if there are, I stand by that statement. They are the best engineers, and I only need to say 2 words, and that's photosynthesis of trees. And maybe that's 3 words, but anyway, photosynthesis in trees. Photosynthesis itself is an amazing phenomenon. It's an amazing miracle. But in trees, it's just beyond comprehension, because the tree has to get the water from underground to hundreds of feet up in the air. And how does it do that? If we were to design a system, it would either be incredibly expensive, or it would be like a diesel engine out there making a ton of noise and smell, and would break down often. But a tree uses the sun, the xylem, and just the natural properties of water. And that's enough to bring water up from the ground, defying gravity up to 100 feet of height. So it's just astounding. That should be several Nobel Prizes in that design itself. It's just amazing. But the top reason why we should thank the trees are, if we let them, they just may help us save the planet. So that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. I can just imagine lots of smiles. I'm sitting here alone in my little room, but again, I hope you enjoyed it. But I'm serious. The good news is that trees may be able to help us save the planet. But for that to happen, more people need to know. More people need to be aware of what they have to bring. So we need to tell the story. We need to tell the story. Just say that to yourself. We need to tell the story. And with a lot of thought, I think the best way to tell that story, and the best way for that story to spread and stick, is through the lens of gratitude. It's just a good way to feel. It's a gift. So with that, why should we be grateful for trees? And I'd like to talk about 3 different areas. There's more, but I'd just like to talk about 3 areas today. One of them, just start with, they're just amazing on their own right. And it's an honor to share the planet with them. Photosynthesis, one example. There's many, many more. But that isn't often enough for people. To be honest, people really care about things that benefit them, and we want them to care. So trees also help humans. They improve our health, and they have for millions of years been creating, supporting, and maintaining our ecosystems. They've gone through some ups and downs with that, and we need to learn from them now more than ever. So let's get started on that list of 3. Why are we grateful for trees? Well, some people might just say they're beauty, and they are gorgeous. This was just a picture I took. We were driving along a road in Maine, and it was stunning. It's like better than being in a museum. They surround us with beauty everywhere we go. And it's not just fall color. That's kind of it's too easy. But the winter beauty is different. There's a starkness and a crispness that resonates in the winter. In the spring, we have beautiful, beautiful flowers. These are some serviceberry trees that are in the golden light of sunset, so they don't actually look as bright white as they did, but it was just gorgeous. We pulled off the side of the road so I could get this picture. And then summer, this is the pine bush with some scrub oaks in front, and the pitch pine in the back, and a beautiful double summer rainbow. So they bring beauty at this macro scale, but don't forget to notice the small scale, the artisticness and the elegance of the design of trees. If you look at a leaf budding or acorns ripening or that miraculous bark, this is again pitch pine bark, that can survive fires. So just beauty everywhere you look. You just need to look. And the designs last. I mean, the other thing about that pump the trees created, it lasts for hundreds of years. This is the Bedford oak. It's down, about 2 hours south along the Hudson in Bedford, New York, shockingly. And it's 500 years old. 500 years old. Just imagine, that sounds, but 500 years ago it was 1500. When that little guy was a sapling, in 1500, and how different was the world than today? And that tree has lived through it all. And there's me, the short youngster right here. Amazing. But then sometimes I'm going around and I'll see a tree and I'll just say to myself, that a tree shouldn't be able to live there. That's just impossible. And there they are. There shouldn't be trees living on a pile of rocks in the middle of Lake George. There shouldn't be a tree on the rocks of Acadia, feet away from the ocean. And there shouldn't be this poor guy trying to survive on a cliff in Olana. But there they are. Life's not fair. They got dealt a bad hand. Their seeds landed somewhere where they shouldn't have, but they've made the best of it. So kind of like we need to at times in our lives. And then this one. This was actually a poster I had in my bedroom when I was in high school. I hated high school. I hated, those years. And this poster gave me hope. It had this saying on the bottom that says that those who strive can reach the sun. I think I remember it right. And it really did help. And a few weeks ago, I looked on the internet and I found it within minutes. It's still there. This tree is still motivating people. And I can just kind of in my head imagine, some poor, miserable teenager like myself, 50 years later, getting inspired and by this tree in this picture, maybe up in their room or I guess more likely be on their phone. But truly, trees add wonder and beauty and inspiration to our world. They are just phenomenal. So it's no wonder we all love a walk in the woods, right? Whether it's this peacefulness on the right is a balsam forest in Maine, where you feel like you're walking on a sponge. Um, it's just gorgeous. Or the snow, again in the pine bush, walking through a pine forest. It just feels good. Um, and that curiosity about, well, why? Why do we feel good when we walk in a forest? Is it real? Um, has led to thousands of different research studies, and many of them have been reported in peer-reviewed journals documenting there are significant physical and mental health benefits from spending time in nature or in forests. So, given those thousands, I've tried to just prevent a quick survey of the mainstream articles, not the maybe exciting new, breathtaking, things that are changing the way people think, but this is just the mainstream because I'm not an MD. I don't really feel qualified to kind of judge some of these new studies that haven't been reproduced or haven't been accepted yet. So I'll just talk about the traditional stuff. That's interesting enough on its own right. More to come as we wait and listen to the new stuff. But a lot of it started the big rush anyway in the 90s with the Japanese studies into forest bathing. Forest bathing is just a fun word for going for a walk in the woods. And if you're really going to take it seriously, you would really be kind of using all of your senses to experience the woods. That's true forest bathing. So what people did was they would collect data, physical data and psychological data. They'd take the blood pressure before and after, the heart rate variability. They'd take saliva samples. They would measure skin, something or other, and before and after. And then they would also perhaps interview the folks afterward or allow them to take a well-known surveys for characterizing mood and happiness. So the one that really caught everybody's attention was one of the first ones to come out where they compared a simple 15-minute walk in the forest versus a 15-minute walk in the city. And what they found was a significantly decreased blood pressure and heart rate for those that were walking in the woods. And even more surprisingly, in their saliva, they found a 16% reduction in cortisol. Now, cortisol is a stress hormone like adrenaline. Adrenaline is more well known, but cortisol must be easier to measure. They're the fight or flight hormones. You remember when you see a train coming at you, you get an increase in your stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and then you're, in theory, be better able to respond to the crisis. Well, they're all well and good, but you don't want to have high levels of cortisol around all the time. In addition, those folks that had walked in the woods felt, calmer and less anxious. So it seemed that they had data to support the fact that trees reduce both the physiological and the psychological symptoms of stress. Now, these have been reported and repeated, many times. There's all sorts of different studies where they make different measurements. The modern ones tend to use EEGs or brain scans because, they're very unobtrusive. You can do that without bothering people and increasing anxiety. So lots of clever ways to get after this, but it's solid. It's been reproduced many times. But do you really need to go outside? Or I guess, no, the first question is how much time really helps. They did a study in the UK and they interviewed 20,000 people. This is a part of another study. They found that 2 hours a week was the threshold to see significant benefits. And the benefits increased with times up until plateauing around 5 hours of time in the forest. That was about the maximum benefit that they saw. Interestingly, they felt 20 minutes was a good slot of time. So 20 minutes a few times a week should enable you to see most of the significant benefits of walking in a forest and reduction of stress. But again, so now the question, I got ahead of myself, do you really need to walk in the woods? And the answer was no. This was a study really done in the 80s that in a science paper that came out, a 10-year study in a hospital in Houston where they reported that gallbladder surgery patients, recovered more quickly. They were discharged at least a day earlier. They had fewer complaints to the nurses. They were a little more pleasant, and they required fewer pain meds. And this study again has been reproduced, but it kind of said just seeing the trees out the window was enough. They didn't really need to be out in the forest. They've reproduced other similar studies have shown, for example, they took 100 kids about 8 years old, divided them up into 3 different groups. One group went to a classroom with no windows, one went to a window that faced a wall, and the other went to windows facing trees. And the kids in the room facing the trees not only scored better on the test they were taking, but they also recovered from the stress of taking a test more quickly. And it doesn't even have to be a tree itself. Pictures seem to work. Again, many studies. Here's just one where they had office workers were shown for 10 minutes. They were allowed to browse through either pictures of trees or pictures of urban scapes or whatever. And the ones that saw the pictures of nature for 10 minutes, recovered faster from a stressful event afterwards. So again, you don't have to be in the woods necessarily to see some benefits. Now then, when you're doing this kind of work, you often run into wanting to ask questions that you just can't answer because you can't design an experiment to answer them. So we can, one of those questions is like, what would happen if you removed all the street trees? Would there be any impact on people's health? Well, we can thank the Emerald Ash Borer for giving us a chance to do that experiment. Because the Emerald Ash Borer killed around 100 million trees, especially in the Midwest, where the ashes were beloved street trees, having replaced the elms that people lost a few decades before. So there would be entire neighborhoods, where the ash trees lined the streets. And after the Emerald Ash Borer, those streets were decimated. And so this researcher then, got some big data, and he looked at the medical records and the death records for people living in those areas, and with different GPS tools, he was able to identify how badly the trees were decimated in the neighborhoods that people lived. And he found 6,100 additional deaths from lower respiratory infections in areas where the trees were gone, as well as 15,000 additional deaths from cardiovascular related causes. And when he got these results, he picked those 2 because he felt that, given what we talked about, that trees might have an impact on those 2 diseases. But he was so stunned by these results and so upset by them, he actually, locked himself in his office for a while to try to understand where he'd made a mistake. But actually he had not. That was in fact, what had happened. So now again, like I was implying GPS improvements, have really allowed people to do larger studies, to be able to quantify the canopy in different areas quickly and efficiently. 2 large studies, 20,000 in Toronto, over 30,000 in London. In Toronto, they demonstrated that people living in areas with a higher density of trees had better cardiovascular health, and they reported improved mood. In London, those same higher density of trees was correlated with lower numbers of prescribed antidepressants. And again, both studies have been repeated, maybe not as large, but in other cities around the world. So here's a summary of some of the research that's been going on. And some, again, I'm staying with the mainstream. Newer or work that hasn't been reproduced or adopted, I've excluded. So I'll read through them. Reduce levels of stress hormones, lower blood pressure and heart rate, boost the immune system, reduce inflammation, accelerate recovery from surgery or illness, improve cardiovascular health, improve respiratory system health, reduce anxiety, mild depression and aggression, improve mood and self-esteem, increase energy level, and increase cognitive function and ability to focus, among others. There's studies in dementia and pregnancy and ADHD, and there's a lot of work going on. That's a pretty intimidating list, and talking about it with my son, who's a neuroscience major, he sent me a review article on stress, both stress and chronic stress. And I was stunned to find that most of these benefits can be attributed to a reduction in stress or chronic stress. I was just amazed. I had no idea that stress was so damaging and, caused so many different people, different types of problems. So although it's not that simple, health is never simple. And newer studies will be coming along, but it's safe to say, given the data that's out there, that trees really do reduce the effects of stress and chronic stress both, which is amazing. It's clearly, looking at this list of symptoms, it's remarkable. It makes me say, hey, let's all go out and quit this talk and go out and run into the woods, and hang out. But, I guess either that or maybe look at some pictures like you are. Just want you to notice that I've been showing you pictures of trees, so you should be feeling quite stress-free. You can thank me later. But how, right? I showed you correlations, only correlations, no cause and effect, no how. And so we really don't know how. People are trying to figure that out. Few of the theories on causes I've listed here, we can just go through briefly. One is it's a physical effect. Hey, exercise is known to reduce stress, and you'd be more tempted to go for a walk in this lovely forest I have here than you would be going on a walk in the city of Schenectady. You might then walk longer and get more exercise because it's just a nicer place to walk. In addition, socialization helps with stress, and you'd be more likely perhaps to invite your friends on that walk in the forest than invite your friends, hey, let's get together and walk through downtown Albany. So again, a physical effect. Another thing to remember, though, is that you don't always have to be out in the forest to see the benefit. Seeing it can be enough. And that gets to sight. Now, first, that was puzzling to me. How can just seeing it be as good as being out in it? But you think about it, a train coming at you is enough to trigger the stress hormone release. Just the sight of the train coming at you is enough. So wouldn't, conversely, the sight of these trees in the forest be enough to reduce your stress hormone level? It makes sense, and maybe that's one of the things going on. Or it could be memories. You see, pictures of the forest and it reminds you of a good memory. When you maybe camping when you were a kid, or some time spent with friends and family. Whatever, it's that memory that the sight of the trees triggers that causes this reduction in stress. And even if you hate trees and have never had a good memory being in the forest, just simply the color green. They've done studies with EEG, believe it or not, and looked at people's physiological response to color, and green jumps out as one that is very calming. So sight is a big one. We rely a lot on sight, but sound, people do love the sound of the forest. They have done these screening studies with EEGs. Again, you can see from the brain waves how much people are calmed. And they surveyed hundreds of different sounds, and the top of the list, were the songbirds, running water, and rustling leaves, all sounds in the forest. So there's a lot more going on with sound, but that's the more, again, the mainstream. Smell. Now, smell is the orphan kind of the senses, I would say. We rarely pay attention to smell, but until we don't, until there's something, but the smell of a forest, the pine forest, the balsam forest in Maine, and it's just wonderful. You go into the forest, you just take a deep breath, and that smell it feels great. It's really good. Smell can also, bring back memories, of good events like Christmas, right? Pine smell can often remind you of Christmas and family holidays and good times. So smell is important. There are others, other variables, that are early on. Stay tuned, we can talk about them next time. But your question is, so which ones matter? And I would say, I think all of them, at any point, all of them contribute, in different situations, different times, different people, they all matter. But because I'm a chemist, I'd like to spend a little bit more time on the smell one, if you don't mind. So we know we all know trees make chemicals for defensive purposes. And we know about the ones in the leaves that are toxic or not tasty, to discourage the insects from eating the leaves. But trees produce these essential oils, and those are the scents that you smell. And the tree produces them for, like the antimicrobial or antibacterial, purposes. But that's what you smell. You smell the tree essential oils when you go into the forest. Now, the interesting thing about smell is more complicated because you can see the train coming at you when you have a response. Well, you can smell of smoke, for example, and you'll have the same kind of response where your body will, rush to produce the stress hormones. So you'll have a physiological reaction. You may have a memory triggered, from the smell, just like sight. But in addition, smells, because you're breathing them in through your nasal passages into your lungs, those molecules that you're breathing in have a chance to enter the bloodstream. And that's very different. And when they do that, they can then, be benign. If they do that, not all of them would, but if they do that, they can either be benign or they can have act as if they're a drug. So that's another thing to factor in when you're talking about smell and these molecules, the essential oils that trees release. So once again, the pine family, the Pinaceae family, I don't know if I said that right, but it has been the most studied because of the forest bathing. Again, a lot of the forest people were walking in were pine and cypress forests. And alpha and beta pinene and limonene create the smell of a pine forest. I don't know if you knew that, but now you can impress your friends. But yeah, it's a wonderful smell. And you can buy them in essential oils and for diffusers and aromatherapy, and it's lovely. Interestingly, once they looked, they were able to detect, the pinenes and limonene in blood samples after walks in the forest, which was amazing, interesting, but was it important? That could just happen. It doesn't mean it makes a difference or not. So a good study to try would be, okay, skip going outside. Let's stay in a room and let's diffuse the room with the scent of pine, with pinenes and limonene. And sure enough, people found the reduction of the symptoms of stress, like we've been talking about, the heart rate, the blood pressure, the EEGs, the better mood, just from the smell of the pine. Interestingly, they found that if the effects grew with the concentration of the pinene and limonene, until I think they quit. It never really plateaued, but I think they just felt that was, being unreasonable with nature. Those concentrations would never be, of interest. So that was pretty exciting, that smell of pine. But then other critics said, hey, it could be just triggering a memory. It doesn't have to be something, physiological. And so you won't believe this, but what they did was they got volunteers to let their infants be tested. 1 to 3 month old infants were tested. They were, given EEG exams, and while the EEG test was ongoing, they were exposed to the smell of the pinene and limonene. And what do you know, even without having Christmas memories, there's the signals of stress reduction were there. So really interesting. They've also looked at cypress trees. Now, cedrol is the essential oil that the cypress trees make, and I don't particularly like it, but they do see similar stress reductions. And they also saw, which shocked people, was not only reduction in stress, but an increased level of what they call the killer white blood cells. They're called NK cells, and these are the the cells, the white blood cells that go after disease cells, virus cells, cancer cells, things in the body that shouldn't be there. But I didn't add that to the list because it is newer. It hasn't been like seemingly accepted as well. I don't know if the level of increase in the blood cells is significant to affect disease. So I didn't really include it. We'll find out more with time. Other essential oils, citrus, and herbs are being studied, but it's a lot earlier days than what we have now with the pine. So really interesting. So why should we be grateful for trees? Well, they're amazing, and they do clearly improve our health, helping us better deal with stress and chronic stress, which is a huge, huge benefit. Then now let's talk about the environment. Again, trees have been creating and maintaining ecosystems for millions of years, and let's ask for their help now. Start with climate change, and removing greenhouse gases. Trees sequester CO2, as we all know, during photosynthesis, but it is the best sequestration technology by far. Back to that engineering thing, we can't even come close to sequestering the amount, at the cost, and even having something to do with the CO2 once you've sequestered it. That's one of the bigger challenges. Trees use them for food and to grow. That's the raw material for generating, the rest of the tree. They store that carbon, like I said, in the roots, the trunk, the branches, and the leaves, everywhere, and in the soil. Have the great place to put the carbon once they've sequestered it. Interestingly, types of soils also will store carbon, and that the amount will depend on the type of soil and location. But we happen to be kind of in a sweet spot with our temperate forests, in that the soils in the temperate forests actually store twice the carbon as the trees above ground. So the combination of the two in the US, which is mostly temperate forest, roughly 800 million tons of carbon, which is 12% of the annual emissions, in the US. And for context, I've tried to look that up, and from small trucks and cars, the emissions in the US range anywhere from like 16 to 20%. So we're close to compensating for all of the cars and light trucks that are driven in a year and their CO2 emissions. Amazing. They also reduce emissions, especially in their cooling abilities. We all know they provide shade, but they also cool by transpiration, and that's the water evaporating from their leaves cools the air around it. So that can really reduce your cooling costs and emissions. But more importantly, almost, I think, is it can reduce these urban heat islands that they're talking about. And because of all the concrete and asphalt in cities, the sun beats down and they just radiate heat. You may have noticed how your driveway is super hot on a summer day. Well, imagine all that heat radiating throughout the city. When trees shade the pavement and the concrete, they can reduce the temperature of 7 to 10 degrees, which is a really important cooling effect, in the outdoor urban areas. So quite important in the environmental justice. They clean the air. Air pollution is one of their top public health issues. Two types of air conditioning, yes, air pollution. Those are the gaseous oxides, carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur oxides, as well as airborne particulates from different, decomposition products. Trees help us with both. They degrade the oxides, the gases, they go in through the stomata and the tree degrades them, and the leaves. And the leaves also will intercept, just by stickiness, some of these airborne particulates. They'll get washed off eventually, but that's okay. Hopefully the soil will clean them up. And water. This is a fact. Although forests take up about a third of the real estate, they provide more than 50% of the fresh water in the US. That says it. I don't need to add anything to that. That's amazing. We rely on our forests for over 50% of our water, fresh water. But what I didn't appreciate was how much benefit they did provide us, in storm situations, which we're facing more and more of. I used to think of them as kind of an umbrella, and that was about it, but no. So when talk about a storm, a hard, intense rain is coming down, and the tree can store about an average tree can store 100 gallons of water on the leaves and on the bark, and that prevents it from deluging the ground. It does slow down, until it gets saturated. It does slow down the rain as it hits the soil. It slows it down enough that the roots can take it up, and the water gets purified and will then, replenish the water table. When the tree's not there, if you look to the right, the water the high velocity water can impact the grass, turf grass, but compacted turf grass is very slow to absorb water. So most of that water will then run off into the streams or our storm sewers and wastewater systems and flood them. If there's no grass and it's soil, in the agricultural areas, we lose a lot of topsoil to erosion, which then runs off into our streams and into our water and sewage systems. But even worse yet is if that rain hits the impervious surfaces like the asphalt and the concrete we've been talking about. Because then it cleans them, washes off all the oils, the pollutants, the fertilizers, anything that's there, washes them off again into our storm systems and into our streams and streams and rivers, and requires additional costs for purification in our stormwater systems. So the trees really providing a lot of benefit in the storm. Both practically reducing erosion and pollution, and replenishing our groundwater and preventing costs of recovering, polluted water. So the question is, how much does all this matter? Air, water, and CO2, how much does it, what kind of perspective versus the scheme of the problem? And so in the 80s and 90s, people were noticing the loss of canopy in the big cities, like New York, LA, Chicago, Oakland, Sacramento, all of them started tree campaigns, and they coined the word urban forest and as a way to publicize it. An urban forest is the street trees, the park trees, and the ones in people's yards. And they wanted to try to find a case that the loss of the urban forest would have environmental repercussions. And they wanted people to then invest in that urban green infrastructure, they called it, so that, we could maintain our urban forests. Luckily, the U.S. Forest Service at that time had started investing in understanding quantification of the environmental benefits of trees. And the Forest Service partnered with Davy Trees and a few other organizations and came up with a tool called iTree. Now, some of you may have heard of it. It came out in 2006, and it's been a real breakthrough to some audiences. And this is a website, I just want to read off. This is how they describe themselves. iTree delivers current peer-reviewed tree benefit estimation science from the USDA Forest Service to all types of users with free tools and support. And that's really a nice summary of what they have. Here are some of the tools. this is a snapshot of part of their website, but they have very easy tools. You can use them as apps on your phone, your laptop. I've used two of them. One of them is called My Tree, where you can look at an individual tree. Another is Our Trees, where you can look at a community or a canopy of trees. How it works is for My Tree, let's say I want to do the scarlet oak in my yard. So I input the diameter, the kind of tree it is, the species, and where I live. And then it has all this information in the background. It has data on the trees, given that diameter, calculate the canopy and et cetera, the different species, growth rates, leaf, surface area and number, all the weather, all the city data you might need. And then all of that's put together, the location, the species, and the field data along with what you put in, and they calculates out an estimate of the benefits. And what they look at is on the right, pounds of CO2 sequestered, gallons of stormwater runoff that have been avoided, air pollution removed, and then if you want to get into energy savings, you can. Here's a little piece of the output for my tree, acorn, the scarlet oak. And you see that, in 20 years, this tree, from the carbon dioxide, stormwater, and air quality and the like, is going to provide about $1,000 worth of value to the community. Then they give you this, little, if you want to get some context for this cute little thing about how much that really means. It's a great model. They have really, really tried to include everything they can think of. But that's the thing with a model. We don't know everything. You can't think of everything. So they use assumptions and approximations, and they get estimates, and the estimates are wonderful. But estimates, in my experience, and I like to be conservative, are really best for comparison. So let's say, I got my tree, what if I had planted a white oak? What if I wanted something that would take up more CO2? What if I wanted to fill my yard and really create a CO2 capturing forest? You can have all these little what if questions, and it gets addicting. You have to be careful. You can play on this thing for a long time. Or you can answer a specific question. I did our town of Niskuna on the tree council, and we wanted to try to communicate to the stakeholders that their tree canopy is disappearing quickly and what that might mean. So we started using iTree to kind of help figure that out. So it's a global tool. There's over 1 million users, and I just like the fact that there are 1 million people out there that really want to understand and quantify tree benefits. So it is a success. And they've used it in clever ways. You can get these large signs. We have one down at the greenhouse where it just says this tree gives back, and then you start the conversation. Somebody walks by that and says, what the heck? What does that mean? And you can explain things and, again, educate and share the message. Another one here is Milwaukee's trees. Think about it. I like that one too. Thought-provoking. Again, getting people to think about trees and what they can mean. But we all know not all benefits can be quantified. In fact, some of the more important ones can't. And that's, our environment and what we're seeing in our loss of ecosystems and biodiversity. You can, the extinction numbers are horrible. You can get really upset. Go on, that's a whole nother talk. In fact, there's a whole nother book, right? But many books. But what really brings it home to me is my car windshield. I remember as a kid, when we went out in the summer, you'd spend more time at the gas station cleaning the windshield of bugs than you did getting gas. Now you can go all summer and barely have to clean it off. That brings it home. It's in my life. This insect apocalypse is real and it's in my life, in my world. So trees, they've been maintaining our ecosystems for us, and maybe they can help us despite how we're messing them up, because they manage the habitat. And what I mean by that is they take care of the non-living part of a habitat and keep it working for the living part, and provide food and shelter. That's simple. So as a quick look through on some of that, if you take an example ecosystem, this is a temperate forest one we would all know, and how do trees manage that infrastructure, so to speak? Well, they moderate the temperature, first of all, with shade. The shade is important in streams and rivers for cooling. Cooling the water enough especially in the summer for the aquatic life. Trout is kind of the flagship for that. Then they manage water flow, just like the example we had in a city. The same thing happens, in a forest, and they provide similar benefits. Their roots anchor, steep areas, whether they're stream banks, hillsides, or mountainsides, and keep erosion from decimating the landscape. And we often forget, those leaves, the decaying leaves really provide, an essential environment, for our decomposers, without which we would be lost, and result in creating the wonderful rich soil of a forest. So those are just a few. As far as food and shelter, you can come up with many examples in your head, I'm sure. I've tried to provide examples for things that don't often come to mind. Here, starting at the left, the tree litter. The tree litter, again, excellent. It's necessary for the decomposers. There's more life below the leaves than there is above, they say. And that's true on land and in water. The leaves in the water are also providing, as they decay, food and shelter for different aquatic life. Now, trees are wind pollinators, but in early spring, like now, they are essential pollen sources for the early bees. They've done studies there and looking at the mason bees, for example, and it's mostly tree pollen and specifically oak pollen that they're living on. Decomposing wood, whether it's laying on the ground or standing up, again, a lot of home and a lot of shelter and food. The fungi, we can't forget the fungi, living on either live or dead tissues, but incredibly important in a forest, as well as our tree leaves and insects. So keystones, again, we know about them. Keystone species have an unusually high impact on our ecosystems and biodiversity. That's quickly said. Oaks lead the list of supporting caterpillars, which are essential for our food webs. And quote Doug Tallamy, oaks are the best plant by far to support a food web. And oaks, I think, I definitely lead the way. I would agree with Doug. They feed thousands of species. They've done counts in England. Right now, in an English oak, there are 2,300 different species that feed on an oak. Acorns, the alone, feed 180 species, and average tree will make 3 million in their lifetime. They promote with their large leaves and their huge root systems. They are unmatched in protecting the watershed and stabilizing the soil. And their long-lasting leaves, surprisingly, that's a benefit, and that you always have enough leaf litter. The leaves decompose so slowly, you always have enough leaf litter to support the decomposers. So this is a picture I found, from Doug on his Homegrown National Park website. Oak acorns are the grassroots solution to a biodiversity crisis. And with that, I hope you now think this is a stupid question. Why should we be grateful for the trees? And I'm done. So let's thank our trees a lot. They make our world a much better place. So let's be grateful for that role that they play. And please, tell the story, speak for the trees, just like the Lorax does. One person can make a big difference.